Welcome to Construction Genius. My guest today is Antonia Botero. She is a second-time guest on Construction Genius. She is the owner of a boutique project management and development strategy consulting firm, Mad Project. And we have a almost hour-long conversation today about two things: strategy and project management. Strategy from the perspective of your market shifts, economic condition shifts. How are you going to respond to that as a construction company? How are you going to tap into the genius of the people that you have in your organization, as well as the relationships that you have external to your organization to identify the right projects with the right clients in the right locations? That includes shifting your strategic perspective as perhaps one particular niche dries up and other niches open. And by the way, speaking of niches and strategy, I just want to give a quick plug for my book, Construction Genius: Effective, Hands-On, Practical, Simple, No BS Leadership Strategy, Sales, and Marketing Advice for Construction Companies. You can get the book on Amazon. You can get it in Kindle format. You can get the paperback, just like this one right here. You can get the Audible version. It's a killer book. You should pick it up. It's a book that every construction leader must read. Okay, and then after we talk about the idea of strategy, we dive into the importance of project management. And from a project management perspective, we emphasize what A-player project managers do. They have a sense of urgency. They understand their documents. They have a real grasp of how to coordinate every project, and they have a commitment to process. And so strategy, project management, that's what this conversation is all about. You're going to enjoy it. Antonia is an expert. Check out her website, madproject.com. Check her out on Twitter. Her Twitter game is very strong. You're going to enjoy this conversation. Thank you for listening to Construction Genius here today. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Antonia, welcome back to Construction Genius.
Thanks for having me back, Eric.
Dude, it's awesome. I'm really glad to have you back. I love following you on Twitter and your insights and your straightforward way of communicating them. Man, I like that. So I'm like, got to get you back on the pod. Okay, so I want to talk about strategy here. What makes a good, solid strategy in the construction industry? What are some of those elements?
Again, one of the things that we've talked about a little bit is all of these sort of first principles that really apply to any kind of shop. Just because you're in construction, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden the principles don't apply to you, right? And so one of the first things that we talk about is sort of really thinking through what kind of business you want to run. What kind of construction shop do you want to run? Do you want to run a high value shop, or do you want to run a high volume shop? And even though construction kind of bends towards the high value just because it's a very expensive, labor intensive activity, it doesn't mean that you can't sort of bend it a little bit towards the high volume. Let's say if you have a specific trade that you're a part of rather than a general contractor or a construction manager. And so really kind of going back and having that sit down and write down, which business am I in? Am I in a high value or am I in a high volume? How am I going to make the revenue? Is it going to come from a lot of small transactions, or is it going to come from a few really big transactions? And that's a good way to start.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit, because we all know the volume is sexy. Getting your name on a project, getting your billboard, your banner on a project as someone drives down the freeway is cool. But with volume comes pain, right? So the more volume I have, just by the nature of the business, in many cases, the more pain I'm going to get, particularly if that volume is generated by multiple projects. So what are some of the key insights or the key markers that I need to be thinking about when I'm making this decision between volume and value?
Yeah. So at that point, it's really a matter of understanding whether you're going to run this by yourself or whether there's some expertise that you need from someone else to help with dealing with the volume or dealing with the specific trade things, technical things that maybe you don't know how to do. So you'll have to determine whether you're doing it by yourself or you're going to partner. And then you also need to determine whether or not you're going to have to hire a specialized team, or if you're going to carry the majority of the bigger strategic business management by yourself. So it really varies. Answering that high volume, high value question is really going to have kind of like a knock on impact on whether or not you do it by yourself, whether you're going to need a team. Are they going to need to be specialized? Do they need special knowledge and special training? So that's kind of what follows looking at high value, high volume conversation.
If I choose the high value route, and in doing so, I'm thinking that that requires some niching to a certain extent. Is it possible then to scale a high value organization?
I mean, you can, but you're going to need a really big team. And so that high volume better be really high. And so now you've established your constraints, right? You've said, okay, like I need to make these projects can't just be medium sized. I can't be doing the $50 million things. I'm going to have to do the $500 million things because I'm going to need a very specialized team to do it. And in order to have a very specialized team, I'm going to need to pay them well. So that's the trade-off. And that's why it's so important to establish what game are you playing very early on.
There's a lot of temptation, though, in construction. And the temptation comes in a couple of different ways, and particularly where we're sitting at the moment. One temptation is when the economy is going well and I have all these opportunities coming my way, and I just keep saying. The other challenge is when the economy is going badly, and let's say a particular niche that I have dries up, and I'm just casting around anywhere for any kind of project that I can do to keep my guys busy. When the economy starts to dip and perhaps the niche that I'm in begins to dry up, how should I begin to strategically look at pivoting in order to sustain and maintain my business in the downs as well as in the ups?
And no, that's a great question. And I think it's almost the same exercise in the reverse. So instead of saying, okay, what kind of shop do I want to be? What resources do I bring in to achieve that? It's almost like these are the resources that I have that I want to maintain. And so what other type of work can we attack? And it's not super easy for people to pivot from high value to high volume super quickly, but it is worth a thought. So we have to sort of sit down and say, okay, well, and I think the people who do this really well, almost in like a very tiny scale, is the landscape shops that pivot to tree lighting in the winter, in like winter climates. And so it's what expertise do you have on hand? It's like, well, you have a bunch of people who are very familiar with the plants, who actually climb trees many times because they do tree trimming. They're also able to string lights. And so that sort of thought is, what are the resources that we have and how can we use them in other ways? But it might take some thought. I mean, you might need to sit down and take a pause, and you may need to sort of restructure your workforce a little bit. You may have to let go of some people and hire people with maybe different skills. If you're like low volume, high value, and you decide to pivot to like high volume, you're probably going to need to get more administrative stuff, right? If you're going to have more contracts or more accounting, then you're probably going to need a little bit more help with dealing with all the extra paperwork that you weren't having to do before. So it will require thought and it will require restructuring, but it can be done. And it's something that it's what's, in my experience, it's what's kept some of the shops that I'm familiar with that have been around for decades. That's a lot of what they've done. It's really figured out, okay, these are the resources we have. How can we move them around to kind of continue, even though our business strategy has shifted a little bit?
Yeah, it's really interesting because the first thing that popped into my mind there is the idea of pivoting is often challenging for us because we kind of have this bias to looking at what's worked and doubling down on that and insisting that's going to work because it's worked. And then sometimes we can be too slow to pivot because we are still stuck in that mindset that this is going to work. So what do you think, in your experience, that the best companies do to keep that innovative mindset, that willingness to pivot in the business so that when the economy does shift, they don't get caught with a bunch of overhead and a tiny backlog?
Yeah, that's a really tough one because I think it's also a little bit related to like the know thyself sort of conversation. How are you going to run this place and how are you going to make strategic decisions? If you're the kind of person who has a really tough time accepting change, for example, then maybe you want to have some sort of advisor or mentor who can help you talk through those things when you don't have the partner that is going to be that person. So it is really a matter of knowing the limit of your competence. And that includes the emotional competence to recognize when you're about to get caught in a bad situation and maybe ask someone else for help in how to restructure or how to think through this differently. That's a really hard one. And I think that's also the reason why we see so many companies go under when there's a shift in the market, because it's a really difficult thing to do. And being aware of it is also really hard.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I have a client at the moment. Their niche is complex and demanding work in the type of work that they do. And in the type of work that they do, there's all this cheap, easy stuff that gets flooded with a bunch of competition, but they purposely don't go after that, even though they can technically do it. The challenge for them is that in the geography that they're in at the moment, that type of work is kind of drying up a little bit. Really interesting. They're committed to their complex and demanding project type, but the location that they're in, it's drying up. And so they're having to think about new locations to go to. And that's presenting a whole set of other challenges in the business.
And I think that's another option, right? Like, how do you solve that problem? You either go somewhere else, or for a lot of the national companies, I mean, my work is national. And so for me, having that, I mean, not that I'm thinking of doing an ebook, but if it came to that, the sort of like high value work dried up for me, there's sort of all these other things that I would probably begin looking at. Different kinds of consulting. Maybe it's like more one-on-one stuff, which I don't do a ton of on purpose because my time is really spent with the big clients, right? So that is a pretty interesting challenge. And looking at other geographies is one way to solve it, unless you're a national company. And then it can get a little, you're going to have to shift into the opposite, whether it's higher volume or higher value, depending on where the market's going.
Let's go into the executive boardroom right now of a construction company. And we're recording this in late November of 2022. Some people have been trying to talk us into a recession now for the last 18 months. We're not quite there yet, but we're teetering. And so every good construction company should be in their boardroom with their senior team having these discussions. What are the key questions that me as the leader of my construction company need to be asking my executives as I'm considering the strategic landscape and adapting to that?
I mean, the first thing I'd say is, what are the things that you do really well? What are the things that your people do extraordinarily well? What is it that you do better than anybody else? And you really want to start there. And I think you can look at it in one of two ways. The first is the kind of work that you've done in the past, but also the kind of talent that you have sitting at that table. You may have people there that are applying lessons from different niche into doing the work that you do really well, but they may have all this entire different expertise that now you can call on because the market is changing. So that is a big one. I'd say not only your exceptional work, but your exceptional people. That's kind of, yeah.
Let me just ask you there. This is really interesting because let's say I'm the owner of the construction company and I've got these guys or gals in my company and they have an expertise that perhaps I don't have, that I might be able to leverage, and yet I'm not willing to give up control. And as a result of that, I may be reluctant to pursue the expertise that they have because I still want the control.
Again, you go back to that sort of know thyself and really soul search at that point and say, what's better? Are you holding on to your control or holding on to your company? Because at some point, you're going to have to make that decision. So looking around the room and saying, okay, I've got these exceptional people who I hired for a reason. They know to do certain things better than I do. There's probably some things in there that we can all go follow in a different direction and probably keep this alive. Or I could just not. I mean, that's really a question for that executive to sit down and really think through it and say, well, the options are pretty clear and they can become clear. And at some point, again, that's why so many of these companies go under during shifting markets.
It's interesting because as I'm thinking through this, I'm thinking of someone who many of my clients say they went through the Great Recession. Some of them even went through recession in the early 2000s, the dot-com thingamajig. And I'm thinking about how the past obviously informs what we're doing in the present. And yet, so part of my job as a leader is to draw analogies from the past as I'm looking at the present, and yet not to be stuck in the past in terms of how I respond to the present, because the present is not the past. So here's a question. How do I balance that the usefulness of the analogy of what we did in '08, quote unquote, but this is not '08 anymore. This is 2022. How do I make that balance there, do you think?
Well, I think you kind of highlighted that already. It's kind of that open-mindedness required. So the lesson I wouldn't say is, oh, we did it by doing these specific business things. It's like we did it by kind of keeping our eyes open and solving for what we had at hand. And because the situation at hand, like you said, is not the same. You're seeing very different shift. I mean, for most people, it's a slightly different shift. So I think it's that, like, rely on the open-mindedness required that you needed to have at that moment, that phone call that you made to that unlikely person, like the fact that you listened to one of your executives that you wouldn't have otherwise put in charge of a whole new department in your company. That's the lesson. The lesson is not, oh, well, we went into window washing. No, it's like, no, I listened to this guy who has washed more windows than anybody else. Like, that's the lesson, I think.
So it's interesting. There's a couple of different dynamics that we need to take into account. One is tapping into the expertise that I already have in my company. And it's very likely that the people I have in my company now aren't exactly the same people who went through the last recession with me. And so they're going to have relationships, they're going to have expertise, they're going to have insights that I lack. Particularly, and I think this is important too, let's say I'm a guy or a gal, I'm in my 40s and my 50s, I'm going to have guys and gals who are in their 20s and their 30s, and they're going to have insights that I need to be willing to tap into as well that can be very helpful. And then I think this is another thing. It's so interesting when things are going well and projects are coming in the door. I think I'm a genius, right, at just attracting work, when in fact I may not be. It may just be that because the tide is rising, I'm getting the work. And I need to start to adopt now a selling mindset that perhaps in good times I didn't need to adopt. What do you think is the key shift that people need to make from a selling perspective in order to be able to go through a recession effectively?
I mean, that's a tough one to shift into, because I think a lot of the selling that you're able to do in a recession or in a shifting market is based on the selling that you did when the market was really good. And so what did you do? Again, it goes back to the two things that you got. What's the work that you're exceptional at? How did you showcase that, and how did you market that when things were going well? Because that's going to create that loyalty and those relationships that are, in many instances, and for a lot of the people in '08, using it as an example, they were the relationships that saved them during '08. It was the stuff that you did before. Now, that's not to say that if you haven't built super strong relationships, that's not to say that you can't begin to look at a shift and really have that mindset. So first thing is, again, look at the exceptional talent, because like you said, some of the people there may have relationships in selling or with other people that are going to help you. And then have those conversations in open-mindedness of how else are you going to sell? Perhaps you begin to do advertising online. Perhaps you begin to go into a different market and you're going to have to get in there somehow, and either you send someone for business development. But being open-minded to those things and asking the people around the table whether they have experience and expertise. So it's like, how are you going to expand that marketing if you don't already have the base for it, which you should have been building? You're building all the time. If you own a shop, every day, whether the economy is good and bad, you are working on your baseline for your marketing and your brand and for who you are, and you're selling all the time. So to me, that's always okay, well, the best time to start was 10 years ago. The second best time to start is right now. And so I think the other thing is the willingness to value relationships. Sometimes people are like, oh no, that contract is too small for me, or no, I'm not going to talk to that person because they're not the decision maker. And you might be wrong. I think that having kind of that, giving those interactions the benefit of the doubt a little more as you make a pivot into marketing more is really important. But I always tell people, like, you should be having that mindset all the time.
It's interesting to me, though, because I do think that what can happen when times are going, it's really interesting. I think that when you're starting your business, you're out there hustling for projects, you're out there building those relationships, and then the business starts to kick off a little bit, and your attention shifts from the external win work to the internal build work, and then also deal with the drama of running a business, right? And so my attention can shift. And in my mind, the role of the CEO and the top level people in an organization, one of their primary roles is that business development perspective. And they, like you're saying, Antonia, they have to be focused on that at all times. Now, I'd like to go back and just think about every great construction company, they're building for the right clients with the right projects in the right locations. And I'm thinking about this idea of relationships. I'll tell you a little story and see how this analogizes. It's from my business. So when I started my business, I started calling on people who I knew from a previous business that I was in. Okay. So people I already had a relationship with. And I remember this vividly. And this was cold calling, by the way. And so I would walk into a business and I remember this one guy, he said to me, Eric, we were just talking about you. And he was holding up this book. And the book was The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. And I'd never read the book before, right? But he knew me and he trusted me from our previous relationship. He said, Eric, can you do a workshop for us on this book? Now, I just started my company. I had 4 kids. I had to feed the family. So what did I say? I said, yes, right? And so I read the book and I did the workshop. And I built my whole business based on learning from that book and other aspects. But this is my point. I had the relationship. A project came along that I hadn't done before, right? The actual workshop. But because I had the relationship and it was close enough to what I'd done, I was able to say yes. Now, in my mind right now, as the recession kicks in, the owners of the construction company, they need to make a list of their top relationships, the deep relationships that they have, and even the ones where perhaps they haven't done work for them in a while. And they need to get their butts out there face to face with these people and say, hey, what are you guys working on right now? And it may not be exactly the niche that you're in, but it may be adjacent to it so that the risk profile is sufficiently low for you to be able to take that on or at least look at that project. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I think that's definitely, again, like if you haven't been keeping those relationships through this time, now is the time to begin reaching out and saying, hey, yeah, what are you guys working on? I think it's a really interesting thing that you said where when you start the business, you're really out there hustling for more work and trying to bring in more business. And then at some point your focus shifts. And it's sort of like everything in the business, right? When you start, let's say you start by yourself, you're doing everything. And as you kind of master and build it to a certain point, you hand it off somehow, whether it's your accounting or your human resources, in that case, business development, you hand it off. And you hand it off because of 2 reasons. Number one, you've mastered it and built it to the point where you want. And second, it's important enough for someone else to continue to carry that torch. And business development is super important. And so hopefully you're not having to make that list of relationships for the first time. Hopefully you have someone in your organization who has been keeping a lot of those relationships and has been spending the time in finding out like, oh, I had lunch with so, and they mentioned that they're getting into a different type of projects because the market is shifting. And it turns out that Larry, who we hired 5 years ago, is an expert at that thing. It's not what we normally do. But then I mentioned it to them. And now all of a sudden we have work in Larry's niche. And so there you go. And that happened because you had a business development person who kept the relationship alive and who casually ended up having lunch with the person who had the need at the right time. So again, building that now and being more robust about how your leadership runs and how the key aspects of your business are carried forward is great. But hopefully you've been doing this for a long time. Hopefully you've been keeping good books. Hopefully you've been all of those things. Business development is equally important as all of those things. And so having a person who's keeping those relationships is crucial. If it's not yourself, right?
Yeah. And I do think this is really important too. And I just want to speak to the audience here and just say, you can't rely on your business development people. I mean, they're the ones who are out there, and it's great that they're out there because they're putting your name out there. But people are buying their projects from the people who are ultimately responsible for them and the people who are actually running the work. And we know that most business development people aren't doing that. And so you as the CEO, the president, the senior leader in your organization, you need to make sure that you are dedicating time every week to business development in some form or another. Now, another aspect I want to hit on a little bit here is when things are going really well, I'm going to have a combination of A, B, and C players in my organization. And one of the things I like about recessions in construction is that I can look at my team and I can say, okay, Fred has been a consistent C player. I needed a warm body. I had a project on the schedule. I needed him on the job site or running the work. And I know it wasn't as profitable as it could be. And now perhaps it's time to move Fred on. What I'd like to think about here is this idea of project management, because I know you're a project management expert. And I come across a variety of different project managers in my work where some are C players, some are A players, some are B players. So in your experience, what makes an A-level project manager?
Urgency and doing things right away. Everything is right away. And that's one that is difficult to teach. That one you can do very little about if the person doesn't kind of have that in them. The one that you can do a lot about and that A players have is training. They have good training on the base. And those span across, obviously, the technical aspects of the work, whether it's trade work specifically, or whether it's creating and keeping a schedule, managing people, and also project accounting. And all of those basics are things that you can train people to do. Because you can have people with the right attitude, but if they really don't understand how construction accounting works, guess what? Like, they're not going to keep great project accounting. So those two things together, I think, really mark the A players.
I want to start with this idea of urgency. First, tell us what you mean by urgency.
Well, in construction, we know that 2 days could be like 2 months in any other business. So if something comes up, bringing it up right away to the right people, bring it up to the owner, bring it up to the owner's rep, or bringing it up to the trade, raising your hand quickly is a big one. Keeping up with your documentation, that's a big one too. If there's an issue or there's a change order to be had or things that need to happen, there's a schedule that needs to be updated, it needs to happen immediately. It can't happen when you get around to it. It has to happen right away. And so I think being a project management, for me, a lot of it is being a very organized individual where you have certain days of the week, or certain times of day. Sometimes for people, it's after the trades leave the site, like at 3 p.m. if you're looking regular construction hours. Trades leave the site at 3 p.m. From 3 to 5, you update your schedules and you issue your emails if you're not walking around all day. So those are the kinds of things where organizing yourself really well, where you have these habits that really support that urgency, right? Updating things constantly. The communication is very important. And again, constant up-to-date communication is really what it's about. And you can't have that without the training and without the urgency.
Let's talk about change orders here then, because change orders, they can be a challenge for some project managers in a couple of different ways. I've got two types of project managers in mind. I've got the one project manager who is afraid of conflict and therefore doesn't want to bring up a change order, okay, or address the issue when the scope is going outside of what we've agreed to. Then I have the other project manager in mind who is just too rigid and doesn't understand the art of negotiation and leveraging when conditions change to enhance the relationship and the position of the company. Am I clear on what I've described there?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So in your experience, how do you help the person who's sort of on the passive side and then the person who's perhaps a little too aggressive? How do you handle that?
Well, for both of them, I think a really great way in the training should be the understanding and the knowledge of the contract and the practice of either early on in the project or as the project goes along, the practice of referencing the contracts internally as you're doing the work to say, are we within contract? Is this really a change order? Because the minute that if, let's say you're the passive person, you have basis for what you're saying, it might give you a little more moxie to say, hey guys, by the way, I don't think this is by contract. So that is part one. Knowing the contract can help both of them.
Can I ask you a question about that? So let's say I'm training my project managers and I'm training them on understanding the contract. Okay. And I'm assuming that there's obviously a learning curve here. How do I walk a project manager? What areas do I need to focus on in order for them to know what to look for in the contract to get their arms around it and to understand it?
The first thing is obviously the fee. Like you need to know what your fee actually is, if it's a percentage of your overall. Let's just use a cost plus job as an example. What are your other pluses? Is insurance a plus? Is contingency a plus? What are those percentages? For example, is contingency something I would never agree to is if you're charging me contingency over your insurance. That would not be okay. Or fee over your insurance. Like I want to pay for your insurance straight up. And so normally those terms would be in the contract. So understanding what percentages apply to what portions of the contract is a big one. What qualifies into general conditions. Like, what is general conditions according to this contract or not? I mean, right now we've had a dispute on a project where they're saying scaffold is not part of the general conditions when there's literally a word in the general conditions that says scaffold. So how are we having that conversation, right? And so knowing the contract, what's in the general conditions, what constitutes a change order, what are the time limits around a change order? Because you only have a certain amount of time to say, hey, this is a change order. Like, you can't come back 6 months later and say, hey, by the way, that thing we did, yeah, that's going to cost you 50 grand. You can't do that. So knowing those things, knowing what the markup is on change orders, understanding how those things then need to be presented in your pay application so you're not double dipping and unintentionally, which, to be honest, the times that I've seen double dipping, it's always been unintentional, or most of them, I believe, have been unintentional. So the other things too is like, what are the things that are going to put you in default? That's a really important thing. Like, if you're not issuing schedules once a month in my projects, that's going to put you in default. So will I go and chase you for that? Probably not, unless you're doing a bunch of other things that are not per the contract. And then at that point, I might chase you for not issuing a contract on the 10th of the month, or a schedule on the 10th of the month, as you should have. And that's kind of the part that I was going to say that would help your super rigid project manager. Because those are the things that when you see a contract, there's sort of two categories of things in a contract. There are your obligations and then your party's obligations. And so when you understand those two things and you begin to see how you may run afoul of yours, whether it's in your power or not, hopefully most of them are in your power, because that's also a key to negotiating a contract, is you don't negotiate too many things that are outside of your power, your control. So when you see the things that are your responsibilities and you're aware of what those things are, and then you're going to go and you're going to be super rigid to the other party about their responsibilities, you may realize that at some point, those things that are not in your control, that you don't have the power to change, might bite you if you've been really hard on the other party. Whereas if you say, okay, fine, like, I'm not going to be, let's have a deeper conversation about this change order. Maybe a little bit was our fault. By the book, it's really a change order, but maybe we split it this way, or maybe we figure out a different way of charging the work. Maybe some of it can come from contingency if we agree to it. And having that conversation can help you a lot when the other party, when the shoe's on the other foot, right? And then the other party can come back and say, well, I'm not going to be super rigid on you because you've been lenient on me. But all of that requires a really good understanding and knowledge of your contract. You can't do it without it.
It's so interesting there, just what you're bringing up about the things that are outside of our control, because that influences our projects so often. If I'm too quick to jump on someone, just like you so well said, you better watch out, because at some point, something's going to affect you that you didn't even plan for and you can't even control. And you're going to have to go hat in hand back to that person. And if you treated them too intensely, even if you were right, quote unquote, it's funny, I just thought about the word maturity, and it requires maturity and wisdom to be able to operate in that dynamic realm of the realities of a construction project.
And I think that's something that teaching that part of your project management training is really going to be like, hey, look, like, this contract has two sides, right? There's the categories of things that we're responsible for, and the categories of things that the owner is responsible for. And understanding your very well can really help you see the other person's obligations in a much better light, where you're going to have the entire picture in mind when you go to that change order, when you go have that difficult conversation, because it's going to be an easier one if you have, and again, what we talked about last podcast is the empathy, right? That's going to help a lot when you go negotiate, for sure.
So let's just go back a little bit. And I'm thinking about now, the best PMs, they have this sense of urgency and they're mastering the basics. They have a mastery of the basics. I was thinking about, like, I watch like soccer players, Premier League soccer players warm up for a game. And all they're doing basically is the same thing the 7 and 8 year olds that I coach are doing, is basically passing the ball back and forth to each other all the time. Now, they do it with a level of skill that obviously my 8-year-old doesn't have. However, they are practicing the basics again and again. So what are the basics that in your mind, the best project managers master?
Schedule is a big one. There's different levels of schedule, right? You got the project milestones, you got the super fancy Gantt charts, which I can have a whole conversation about that. But project milestones, I think, is super important. 2-week look aheads, really understanding how to fit them into the context of the job and into the overall milestones. The dealing with people and understanding how to ask for trades. And I think that also requires a lot of understanding your contracts with the trades. So contracts, understanding overall is really important. And then finally, I think the other basic is project accounting. On project accounting, all of it falls on project accounting. Your contract revisions, change orders, they're all related to project accounting, requires understanding the contract. Your accounting also has a major impact on your schedule. Your accounting also has a major impact on your relationships with the trades. And so project accounting, like I beat that drum whenever I can. It's a big one. It's probably, I would say the biggest one, the one you could probably begin with, and all of them kind of layer on top of it is really.
Let's talk that through then. So when it comes to project accounting, you're sitting down with a PM, you're going to be saying, this is what I want you to really be focused on. What are those key areas that they're going to be focused on right out of the gate when it comes to project accounting?
Contract values is the first one. Again, contract terms that reign contract revisions. So what's a change order? What are the markups for change orders? Understanding how those things equal to a current budget. So how are those things? Where are we now, actually? What's our actual commitment? And then understanding the relationship of the billings versus the work in place. And then finally, keeping a good handle on what work has been funded by the owner, what work has been funded to the subs. And I think those are really kind of the basics of the project accounting. And keeping good accounting and track of the clerical aspect of it. Like when an invoice comes in, like it gets logged in immediately, it gets reviewed immediately. And sometimes the project managers handle that, sometimes they don't. I think it depends on the size of the company. I think the project managers who are forced to log every invoice and check for the contract with the sub every time, either as part of their day-to-day or in the way of training and becoming a project manager, are better project managers because they understand that relationship.
That brings up an interesting question. And it really depends on different project managers do different things in different companies. They're responsible for different things. But let's say on a typical construction project, I might have a project manager. I might have a project engineer who reports to the project manager. And then I have my superintendent and my foreman. And what a lot of project managers struggle with is when they become project managers, they're supposed to be operating at a slightly higher level, and yet they still behave like project engineers. So what are the things that you don't want your project managers doing? And I know there's a variety of different answers to that, but in your mind, what should project managers stay away from, if at all possible?
So I think, and this is like the caveat that I'll build my answer on, but if you're a project manager at one point or another, everything on that job is your job. If you have to clean the floors, if you have to pick up garbage, that's your job, period. Like, down to that. So having said that, I don't want you to spend the majority of your time with a broom walking around the site and picking up garbage. I think the biggest thing there is really kind of letting go of the relationships directly with the subs and now beginning to deal with like the executives for the subs. I think the challenge that you're talking about is sort of going from that day-to-day work to the supervisory role of that day-to-day work, where you're having meetings with your project engineer and with your super and getting like, how's the 2-week look ahead? Did we actually hit these days? Did the plumber actually show up? And having that more supervisory relationship to the project versus if I don't show up to the meeting with the plumber, then the plumber's not going to be here. If that's the case, then you need to find a better super. So I think it's really kind of, how do you make the switch? I think part of it is personality. Some people are absolutely cannot be sitting in an office. They don't like it. They don't enjoy it. It's not where their genius lies. They need to be walking around all day. And so there's a little bit of that too in the know thyself and know your employees, to the point where some people, they just don't have it or they don't want it. Honestly, I've known a couple people who were really great supers, got promoted to being project managers and absolutely hated it. And they were like, this isn't what I like to do. So number one, you got to have the right person in the right seat. And assuming that you do, then you begin to look at the systems, right? And do you have a meeting at the end of the day? Again, like what I was telling you, being a project manager, you have to be incredibly organized with your time. And you have to have those systems where you say, okay, every day at 3 p.m., I meet with the super. Every day from 4 to 5, I update the schedule. Like every day from 5 to 6, I issue the change orders for the work that came up for the day. So it's sort of like really kind of setting up those systems, going from a more relationship, task-based thinking to a more systems-based thinking in the oversight of the work. And so that switch for some people is very easy and they take to it like super quickly. And some people are not built for it. And then you have everything in the middle, right? Like people are spectrums. So there's no like yes or no. Some people might have a harder time with it. And after maybe one project, then they got the hang of it and they're good. So it takes a lot of thoughtful leadership and empathy for your people, again, because you might think that a guy's a great super and he'd be a great project manager. And then the minute that you put him in an office, he wants to kill you. Like,
how do I know then that my project manager is incompetent and their project is failing because of them and not because of circumstances beyond their control?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I would say for me, the biggest role of the project manager is to be the coordinator, right? They're the person who says, okay, this is the contract of this trade. They're supposed to start on this date. Mr. Super, when do you need them? And so having that connection, whenever you see that the failure happens at that connection point, the coordination between, the contract for the drywall guy is really not supposed to start for another 3 weeks, but we actually need him tomorrow or next Tuesday, then that's a project management problem. That's your super didn't do anything. Drywall guy didn't do anything. That was a failure of project management. And so you see it whenever there's miscoordination, I think in schedule especially, where it's easiest to see because you'll see that one really quickly.
So 3 words that I'm getting from our discussion here of project managers. The first one is urgency. The second one, coordination. And then the third one is this idea of systematized accounting. And those 3 things have to be working together in order for a PM to be performing at an A level. And it's interesting because it assumes that they understand the work, they have a grasp of their contract, they have a grasp of the schedule, they have strong people skills. There's a lot of work there, isn't there?
For sure. And that's also why having the right person is super important. I mean, I think, and this is something that I know a lot of companies, it's almost a cliche because it's true. A lot of companies have these fantastic estimators. And most people will tell you, we do not put the estimator in front of the client and they absolutely cannot manage the work because the skills required are so different, right? Sometimes you'll have an excellent estimator who makes an excellent project manager, but the estimators everyone's like, they're in a back room, nobody sees them, they don't know they're here. They're like the elves, right? There's a lot of that. Yeah. And it's because, again, the skills are super different. And so I think having the right individual is really important because you do have a lot of technical parts to it, but you also need a lot of emotional intelligence to be really successful at it.
It's interesting because there are some companies and large companies too that have people estimate the work and run the work. And their logic is, I want someone who understands everything that's going on from the beginning to the end of the project. It's very interesting though, because the estimating mindset isn't always the project management mindset.
It can't be, right? Because again, estimating goes down to the task thinking. Right? Like you have this much tile, it is this big, this is how much wastage is required by this manufacturer. That's it. The lead time is 6 weeks, period. I need it by this date. Like everything is very task specific. Whereas in project management, you're layering different things, usually over project accounting, and you're having a systems sort of approach to your day to day and to your thinking and to the project. So that shift, which is so hard to do from super to project managing. Super, it's like, okay, gotta get the laborers to clean this floor, gotta move that to over there so that they can work on that wall. That's a completely different way of thinking than the project manager who's having to think ahead, coordinate a bunch of different parties, remember all these tasks, and then update schedule and accounting accordingly. And again, there are some fantastic estimators I've worked with who are great project managers, but normally the thinking that makes you a fantastic estimator is not the sort of thinking that makes you a really good project manager.
Here's the last big question I want to ask you then. Let's assume that I buy into what you're saying, that my estimator's mindset is different from my project manager's mindset, and the function of the project manager is different from the function of the superintendent. So what we've just done is we've described some classic silos in construction companies, and every construction company battles with those silos. In your experience, what do the best companies do to help each party, each silo, appreciate the other silo and work together well?
That's a great question. And I think that, again, going back to these poor project managers, it can really be resolved with project management at the project management level, but also at the project executive level. Hopefully, your project executive is someone who has managed projects. I really hope so. And so, kind of shepherding the project from the beginning, where you're having the conversations from day one with the design team and the owner and the estimator, and then you're carrying it through and seeing it through. The project manager can really be the glue for a lot of these people. And I think this is something that I disagree with also with architects big time, that they have a different architect do your schematic design and then different architect do your construction documents and a different architect. I think that fundamentally what you end up with is very poorly trained architects at the end of the day. And you also end up with not very good projects that don't have a ton of continuity. And so you're going to have the same problem. If you're a project manager who's supposed to understand all of these layers of coordination, and they're supposed to be the person who's going to bring together all of these different parties to build a building, and yet they don't get involved until you've already bought all your materials and you've already picked all your trades. How are they supposed to keep those relationships together? And how are they supposed to communicate to the architect and the owner that, these materials that you bought don't make sense, but they weren't around when they were bought? So you put them in a really difficult situation where, number one, they don't learn, right? Because they're not around when this gets bought or when the contracts get bought with the subs. And number two, you put them in a really bad spot to do their job. It's really hard to do your job if now you're responsible for a bunch of contracts that you had no part, you weren't even sitting on the table. You don't even know who these people are. And now you're supposed to enter a super complex contractual relationship, and you're supposed to manage it like you've been around the whole time. So I think that is a big one. And essentially, architects are also project managers in their own way. And so it's the same principle of carrying the design or the construction forward. And not to say that there aren't niche and specific things throughout that process that may require a specialized estimator or a super. But why do you have a project manager if they're not around when the job gets bought? That's a big thing that I look for when I'm interviewing sort of contractors for projects, especially big projects. Like, the first person I want to meet is, who am I going to be talking to every day while this thing's being built? So that's a big one.
So we started off with discussion about strategy and how, as a construction company leader, I need to be flexible in my thinking. I need to tap into the genius of the people that I have in my organization when I'm thinking about pivoting. I need to be willing to pivot. I need to be aggressive in terms of my business development. And then we moved into the discussion of the nuts and bolts of project management. And regardless of where I am in the economic cycle, I've got projects that I've got to win, but then also projects that are on the books that I've got to build. So as we're moving forward, and as you're thinking about the next 6 to 12 months in your business, what are you focused on as a top priority to make sure that you're going to be successful?
Well, business development is one of them for sure. And that's like a whole host of things: your branding, your communication, your social media presence, like all the things that go with that. So that's a big one. And then the other part of it is kind of really strengthening the principles. You want to make sure that the way you're managing projects is top notch, not just because you want to do a good job, which is obviously exceptional service is really super important in this industry because it is a service industry at the end of the day, but also because when the market changes and let's say you get audited by the IRS or a project is under a lawsuit and it gets audited in the process of litigation, you want to make sure that those basics have been followed through and are super strong. And so again, project accounting, I know that I beat that drum to death. So going back to the basics and ensuring that all of your processes and your internal things are super strong, your contracts are good, your insurance is up to date, your accounting is spick and span. You want to make sure your bookkeeping is where it needs to be. It's sort of like all of these really easy things that you should be doing every day, particularly when the tide begins to shift. You want to double down on the day-to-day easy things because they're the things that at the end of the day, if there's litigation or if there's an issue, you're going to be covered. You're not going to have to worry about them. And again, your business development and the exceptional work that you do, which also is built on sort of the basics and keeping those day-to-day things, like you're crossing those T's for sure.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Antonia, tell us, just remind the audience, I know some people may not have listened to your first episode. Tell us a little bit more about what you do and how we can get hold of you.
What we do. So we are an owner's rep. We represent owners in development projects. Most of the work that we do is really complex, super weird stuff that nobody wants to, either very strange ownership structures or large master plans or historic buildings. And We've been extremely fortunate to have experience across many different project types. We also do the vanilla, less always exciting, but maybe less terrifying work, like ground up development. Typically, it's $50 million up is what we do. And we do work nationally. We're based out of Park City, Utah, and I also have some presence in New York City. We actually don't have any work in Utah right now. So we do work everywhere else. We're starting to look at projects actually outside of the US. So that's been super exciting recently.
Where are the projects?
So I could just tell you, we have stuff north of the border. We have stuff south of the border.
Ooh,
I know, we're international now. It's
lovely. That's awesome.
I joke about it.
No, it's cool. It's all good, dude. I have clients in the United Kingdom, so I'm like, yeah, I'm international. It's cool.
Well, that's real international, right? I'm not international. Like in my mind, when you think of north and south of the border, we're not going across the ocean yet.
No, it's good. It's good. How can people get a hold of you?
People can find me on Twitter. People can find me on my website. There's a contact form. I get back to people myself. Those are, again, the business parts of it that I'm still doing myself. So those are the best ways to get a hold of me.
Great. Your Twitter game is very strong, Antonia. I appreciate it.
I appreciate that, Eric.
No, it is. It's really good. We'll put links in the show notes to your website and to your Twitter handle as well.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for your generosity. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I do wish you the best in 2023.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much.
Right on. Hey, this is Eric. Thanks again for listening to my discussion with Antonia today. Hope you got some good nuggets on strategy and project management. Before you bounce away, don't forget the book, Construction Genius, effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS leadership strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. Bounce over to Amazon. There's a link in the show notes. Get yourself a copy. Get copies for the people in your organization who are in leadership. And as a special offer, if you are in the greater Sacramento area, and I know some of you are, and you purchase copies for you and your leadership team, get in touch with me and I will come by your office and personally sign the book for you and your leaders. It's a great book. I know you're going to enjoy it. Check it out. Thanks for listening to Construction Genius here today. Have a terrific week.